There is this, I'm going to call it a phenomenon, that happens after you've been a woodworker for a while, and I'd imagine this happens in any setting that requires a workshop. Eventually you'll find yourself in another person's workshop, and it ends up being absolute chaos. Just junk everywhere, no organization, a complete madhouse. But this person, they won't actively realize the bedlam around them. They'll be bent out of shape like a yoga instructor trying to use their drill press, and you'll be thinking, what kind of Lovecraftian nightmare have I found myself in? But the person doing a backbend to drill a hole will act like everything's status quo. I think of this den of madness when I think about how this country operated for the past 200 years, because we're all that desensitized shop owner. We existed in this chaotic hellscape, and so many people didn't think about how crazy things actually were. You can go right back to the birth of this country, where the men who signed our founding documents said all men are created equal while actively owning slaves. And we've been so desensitized to this ridiculously glaring cognitive dissonance that to bring it up comes across as an immature and ineffectual response. You'll get armchair historians arguing about historical context as if that makes the hypocrisy any less egregious. The amount of cognitive dissonance we've had to live with has rotted our brains and wholly prepared us for this administration's doublespeak. And that word, doublespeak, it's a reference to Orwell's 1984, which is an example of a text that is bitingly accurate but has been so overused by our zeitgeist that its mention has also become weak and ineffectual, which is maddening because that feels very intentional, right? If you are someone trying to accomplish similar goals to the state in that novel, then being able to both have that book exist and make its message useless is beyond powerful. Think about the montage of clips I know you've seen of senators like Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio talking in 2016 about how Donald Trump is a terrible person, unfit to lead, a laughingstock, and on and on. And now these men are all sycophants to the president. Do you know how insane that is? And I don't buy any argument about all of these men suddenly having a change of heart. Donald Trump has done nothing to change in the intervening years in any way that would warrant a justified reevaluation of his political acumen. How can we function as a society when it is so painfully obvious that the people we elect to lead are just yes men? I get the image in my head of all those politicians claiming to have selective memories when sitting before congressional hearings, people like Tulsi Gabbard denying the Signal text chat, looking like a 5-year-old caught with her hand in the cookie jar. These are the people leading us. We have created a system in which the only people that are actually capable of winning public office are ineffectual morons willing to bend their morality to the highest donor. I do not believe that free market unregulated capitalism and democracy can coexist. What inevitably happens is that certain people begin to accrue immense amounts of power and influence, and there's no checks in place to stop them from engaging in practices that destroy smaller competition. So you end up with monopolies that control the markets, and those, let's call them oligarchs, know that the only way to keep their monopolistic form of capitalism is to ensure that the people who could potentially regulate them won't do that. So they take their immense amounts of wealth and power and influence and buy lobbyists and find candidates in congressional and senatorial elections that will take their money. And they flood those states and districts with mailers and phone calls and TV ads and individuals willing to shill for these sock puppet candidates. And sure, they don't win all the races, but they get just enough to poison our system, to make sure they're never regulated out of their predation. And we end up with a class of elected official whose only qualification is being willing to say yes and take corporate donations and vote the way they know will get them reelected. This is a completely broken and insane system. And the only way these candidates can win is by having people vote for them. So how do you ensure that regular working class people will vote for candidates that do not represent their interests? You lie to them in gut education so they believe your lies. I've said this a million times and I will say it again. All of these culture war issues are distractions designed to split the working class and get people to vote for the sock puppets of oligarchs. There's a reason that the least educated states in this country keep putting into office the people most willing to sell out the working class. There is a reason that this whole aesthetic of a true working class patriotic American revolves around a disdain for intellectualism and a hatred for those big city folks. These oligarchs know that the second people get an education and spend time around a more diverse array of human beings, the less willing they are to dehumanize people and vote for bigots. All of these arguments are rooted in cognitive dissonance. Hate immigrants because they're increasing crime, even though your neighbor who is an immigrant is a good friend of your family. Hate trans people for destroying women's sports, even though your daughter's best friend is transitioning and you have her over for dinner a few nights a week. If you flood the landscape with all of this cognitive dissonance, the idea of there being some semblance of a set of societal norms that borders on a collective truth gets thrown out the window, and once that's gone, everything gets put back on the table. Suddenly we find ourselves relitigating decades-old conversations that we thought were put to rest. Commencement speeches decrying women doing anything but being stay-at-home moms, claiming that birth control is immoral, using terms like DEI to hide behind arguments that people of color are inherently unfit to work the same jobs as white people, and it goes on, and the window keeps shifting further and further to the right. And if you attack all of these marginalized groups and threaten their existence, then all of our time gets spent on fighting for their basic human rights. And while we're doing that, this class of oligarchs are still there funding their candidates and shaping policy to enshrine their places as the kings of this country. And let me be clear, as long as we keep treating all of this like a game, like blue versus red, as long as we keep looking at our elected officials like a pantheon of gods, as long as we remain divided on the basis of our gender or our skin color, then this class of oligarchs win. They feed on your prejudice and fear and hatred like capitalistic vampires. It is absolutely insane that working class people who are living paycheck to paycheck are more concerned with the genitals of college athletes than they are of the people threatening to defund their health care and gut their social security. It is insane that giant corporations can dump millions of dollars into political races while the people they elect push forward legislation that would make voting harder for working class people. It is insane to watch small business owners support a man who, through mindless tariffs, is destroying their businesses and gutting our economy while his rich friends are making millions off a tanked market. Our democratic way of life is going to be destroyed if the poor and working class can't get our shit together, stop pointing the finger at each other, and finally direct our ire at the oligarchs working to dominate all of us.